Spoiler alert, these tips are going to significantly increase your grades, so only watch this video if you are genuinely serious about becoming a better student and about actually increasing your grades this year, otherwise this is just not for you. I love to study. I make a lot of videos about studying and I have tried so many different study techniques over the years, and these are some of the best tips that I still use all of the time, that I absolutely swear by, and that I think are genuinely going to make a massive difference. Even if your exams are in less than a month, implementing these now, they are going to transform your grades. First of all, everyone tells you you should study smarter, not hard, but what does that actually mean? That means that for everything that you need to memorize, you're using active recall. You're using things like flashcards and you're making use of spaced repetition as well. Whether you use online platforms like Anki or Quizlet to help with that, or whether you prefer paper flashcards and use the lightness system, whatever works, make sure you're implementing those two things for everything that you need to be memorizing. And for those concepts that you need to understand, you want to be teaching it to yourself. You want to be acting as a teacher to yourself. So what does that actually mean? That means that you're not just relying on the work of other people. So you're not just reading a textbook and closing it and going, okay, well, that's my study session over. No, you actually need to test how much you've retained. Otherwise, you're just going to be rereading the same thing and you're not going to be building your understanding over time. The way you do that is by teaching to other people or pretending to teach to yourself. Genuinely, as weird of a study tip as this sounds, pretending that you're teaching a class, it is amazing. Literally make a PowerPoint if you want to. Get out a whiteboard and try and teach the concept to your stuffed toys. It is genuinely going to make a massive difference to your understanding. How do you make that distinction between things you need to memorize and things you need to understand? Memorization is things like diagrams, keywords, definitions, equations, things, or vocabulary for languages. It's just things that you just need to know. You don't really need to know where they come from. You don't need to know how they work. You just need to know they exist and what they are. Understanding everything else. That is pretty much everything in an essay-based subject, whereas memorization is most things in sort of sciences. Obviously, there's a lot of understanding as well. You can get by with memorization a lot more than you can for humanities-based subjects. Plan out your study sessions. Now, you need to understand that the way that most people's brains work is you study in sprints and not in marathons. Because if you do sort of marathon study sessions ages before an exam, you're going to burn yourself out. It's just not going to happen. If you do them right before an exam, okay, you might be cramming, and cramming can be good sometimes, but everything's going to be in your short-term memory. And if you have lots of exams over a prolonged exam season, the way the GCSEs and A-levels work, for example, that's just not going to be sustainable. You're not going to be able to retain enough information, and you're not going to get the grade you could be getting if you were revising in sprints, which basically means spacing it out over a longer period of time, looking at things for shorter intervals. It's much more manageable to do, say, 4 hours a day than 8 hours a day for a prolonged period of time. And also means that you're building things up because you're constantly reinforcing the ideas of a certain subject as you study it over time. You're building up a long-term memory, which then the night before or the week before an exam, you can add to with short-term cramming, but you've got the majority of things in long-term memory, which means the cramming is more effective inherently. As you're planning your session, make sure you do break things down into manageable chunks and actually assign a realistic length of time to the things that you're doing. If you say, I'm going to study this entire topic for chemistry and it's going to take me less than an hour, it's probably not. And then you're either going to be sacrificing studying other things by overrunning on this chemistry, or you're only going to be studying the first bit of the topic and not the rest. You're sort of neglecting it. But then in your head, you might have thought, oh, well, I basically studied that whole topic. And then there will be things that you genuinely just have not looked to. And inevitably, those are what's going to come up on the exam, and then you're going to feel really bad about it. I always like to use a planner or some sort of digital calendar to plan out my study times. And crucially, I would make sure that I did the hard things early on in the day. I work best, my brain works best in the morning between about 9 and 12. That is when I get the best of my work done. For other people, it's in the evening. Some people, it's in the mid-afternoon. Really try and sit and think and recognize what is the best time for you, and put the hardest subjects and the hardest concepts at that time, because that is when your brain is going to be most focused and most able to complete things. If you stick to one study resource or one study format, you're basically learning everything in one way. And that one way might not be working for you. And so a lot of people will just go with the way that they were taught in school, which is normally look in a textbook or watch a video, and will then think, oh, well, I'm clearly just not a great student, or I'm not very good at this subject because that one way is not working for them. There are so many ways. Look at flashcards, look at mind maps, look at blurting, look at refinement technique, look at so many different study ways of sort of getting information into your head. Just because one isn't working for you does not mean you're a bad student, does not mean that you're not good at this subject. You just need to trial lots of different ways, and you're lucky because it's still over a month before exams begin, so you have got the time to trial different techniques. Some people say, oh no, it's too late, just stick to what you know. If what you know isn't working, you might as well try other things, because you can't be losing. Either they don't really work, just as this current method isn't working, fair enough, or they work really well and you see improvements in your grades. So do make the effort to just try different ways of studying, and don't think that you need to be using the same study technique throughout all of your subjects. Of course you don't. The way that you study maths is going to be very different to the way you study English, so don't think both of them can be done out of a textbook. When you are in the process of learning things, you need to make sure that the notes that you're taking are effective. Now, for a lot of people, these notes are being taken in class, so it can be really tempting to just get out a piece of paper and just write randomly and just hope it sort of works, but that is never going to be a very good technique. A really quick and easy way of upgrading your notes in class, particularly if you're like me and you're not a massive fan of the Cornell technique, where the Cornell technique is basically, you split your piece of paper, you have a thin column, a thick column, and then a little bit at the bottom. Thin column, you have sort of keywords, key ideas, key formulae, key equations, key diagrams, whatever. In the big bit, you just have an explanation of things. That's where you're taking general notes, and at the bottom you write a summary. That can be great. It didn't really work for me. I didn't really like it. What I would do instead is I would use the folding notepaper method. So essentially, I take my sheet of paper and I make a thin column by folding it over. And as I was in class, again, I would use that thin column to sort of write keywords and write key ideas. But the way that I do it is that sort of next to it, so I'd unfold it and have the whole thing out, and in this like folded column, that's where all my keywords and stuff, and then next to it I'd write the definition, or I'd write an explanation. And basically what that meant is I could fold the sheet of paper over and I could just be looking at the thin column, and I could test myself, like, here's a keyword, what's its definition, and I could turn it over and look at it. And I thought that worked really, really well, because not only did it write me good notes, but it also meant that I had a revision resource pre-made already, because a lot of the time people write really messy notes in class, and then that means that you have to almost redo those notes to make them nice and put them in your folder. No, we don't do any of that. I would just use my fold notepaper method, and I would have a revision technique automatically made for me. And also, you're going to hate me for suggesting this, but honestly, just take care of your brain. Your brain is an organ. I was going to say it's a muscle. I don't have the medical knowledge to comment on that. But you still need to take care of it regardless. That's sleeping for a decent amount of time. No amount of studying at night is going to overtake having gotten a decent amount of sleep before an exam. You can be cramming all night long, but you will literally have forgotten all of it by the morning unless you have a decent sleep. So I'm not against cramming, but stop cramming at a reasonable hour so that you can actually sleep enough time before your exam, so that then you actually get the benefit of having done that short-term memory burst right before the exam, because otherwise it was all a bit pointless and you're going to perform worse in your exam because you're tired. Don't be doing that. So those are some of my top study techniques. See you in the next video.